Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and also that bell icon so you don't miss any of our deep dives. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that's super important for anyone who's interested in internal security, but especially for those UPSC aspirants out there, combating terrorism in India. Whether you're a student or just someone who wants to be well informed, this deep dive is definitely for you. Now, to help us navigate this really complex topic, we've got an expert here with us who can, break it all down and offer some really unique insights.
Well, thanks for having me. Terrorism is a global issue, but understanding India's unique challenges and the forms that terrorism takes there,
Yeah.
that is crucial.
Absolutely. And one thing that really struck me when I was going through the source material was just how difficult it is to even define terms like extremism and terrorism.
Hmm.
There's no real universal agreement, which kind of feels like a pretty fundamental problem.
Yeah, it really is. It really speaks to just how complex this issue is. What one person considers terrorism, another might see as a fight for freedom, and then you have state-sponsored actions that just make things even more blurry. That lack of a clear definition makes it really hard to cooperate internationally and put legal frameworks in place.
Okay, so how does India approach this? What's the legal framework for defining and then actually combating terrorism inside the country?
Well, India's legal definition of terrorism is interesting. It doesn't actually look at the intent. It focuses on the act itself. Of course, this has caused a lot of debate, and there's been this constant kind of evolution of the laws. You had TADA back in the 80s during the Punjab insurgency, and came POTA, and now we have the UAPA.
Right, the UAPA. The source material mentions it's been amended, I think a few times, most recently in 2019. What's the significance of those amendments?
Well, each amendment kind of reflects how the nature of the terrorist threats is changing. The 2019 amendment, for example, broadened what a terrorist act means. It now includes things that happen outside of India, and it gave authorities the power to label individuals as terrorists, which, as you can imagine, has sparked a lot of debate about potential misuse. It's really important for people studying internal security, UPSC aspirants especially, to really get this legal landscape.
It's wild how the law has to adapt to these new threats all the time. And speaking of threats, India faces like a whole range of them, from ethno-nationalist to religious and even left-wing extremism.
Exactly, and each type has its own unique challenges. Ethno-nationalist terrorism, like the Tamil separatist movement, is rooted in identity politics and the desire for self-determination. Then you have religious terrorism, which is driven by extremist interpretations of different faiths. We see that globally. And then left-wing terrorism, fueled by socioeconomic inequalities, like the Maoists in India. Understanding all these different motivations, the different ideologies, it's crucial to come up with good counterterrorism strategies.
Oh, absolutely. There's one type of terrorism that really caught my eye, though: narco-terrorism. It sounds incredibly dangerous and complicated.
Oh, it is. Narco-terrorism is where drug trafficking and terrorism intersect. Basically, criminal networks use profits from drug trafficking to fund terrorist activities. It creates a dangerous cycle that destabilizes entire regions and fuels more violence. And it's a difficult challenge because it means fighting criminal networks and terrorist groups, which are often working across international borders.
So we're not just talking about ending the violence, but also taking down these complex financial networks. The source material also goes into some of the tactics used by terrorist groups.
Yeah.
And one name that just kept coming up was Pakistan's ISI.
Well, the ISI's support for terrorism in India, that's well documented. Their strategy, it's basically about bleeding India with 1,000 cuts, exploiting internal divisions and supporting separatist groups like the Khalistan movement in Punjab.
That's a pretty scary thought. The source material even outlines their six-pronged motto: bleed India through constant conflict, destabilize the economy, supply arms to militants, support anti-government groups, spread Islamic fundamentalism, and sow communal hatred.
Each point in that motto is a real threat that India's had to deal with. Understanding that framework, it's so vital for anyone studying internal security, especially to understand the external forces at play in India's fight against terrorism.
It really puts the whole challenge into perspective, and all this activity needs funding. So how are these terror networks financed?
Well, the way they get their money is constantly evolving. It's not just about state sponsorship like it used to be. Now they use things like drug trafficking, counterfeit currency, extortion, even donations from people who sympathize with them around the world. Tracking down and disrupting that money is a major hurdle in combating terrorism.
It's like a whole underground economy dedicated to supporting these activities. So what's India doing to combat terror financing?
Well, the government's put several measures in place. Demonetization to try and curb black money, strengthening the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, creating a dedicated cell to fight the financing of terrorism. And they're focusing on tracking the financial flows through Hawala networks and cracking down on money laundering.
And international cooperation is key here, right?
Right, absolutely. India is an active participant in the Financial Action Task Force. It's a global watchdog that sets standards for combating terror financing. Their blacklisting and graylisting mechanisms really put pressure on nations to crack down on these illegal financial flows, which makes it harder for terror groups to access funds.
That's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
But the thing about terrorism is it's constantly changing. The source material talks about this shift towards, online terrorism and cyber extremism. It feels like a whole new battlefield.
It is, and it could be even more dangerous. Online platforms are being used for recruitment, training, and radicalization. And it's so much harder to track and control because it goes beyond borders. One tweet, one video can reach the whole world in seconds, spreading extremist ideologies and potentially inciting violence.
So how do you even fight something that's largely invisible and happening online?
You need a multifaceted approach. International cooperation is essential. Then comprehensive legislation that deals with online radicalization and terrorist content. But of course, we have to balance that with freedom of speech. And we need sophisticated tools to monitor online activity and pick out potential threats.
It sounds like you're constantly playing catch-up. How do we balance these measures, which are necessary for security, with fundamental rights, like freedom of speech? It's a delicate balance.
It really is. Any measures taken have to be very carefully thought out. We need transparency, we need accountability to make sure we aren't infringing on civil liberties. Finding that balance is a constant challenge. And it's a topic that comes up a lot when we talk about counterterrorism strategies.
This has already been so insightful. We've covered so much. The legal definitions, the different types of terrorism, the financing, the rise of online extremism.
And we've only just scratched the surface. This issue is so complex, it requires us to constantly be learning, adapting, and working together to effectively combat terrorism.
Yeah, it really does. Combating terrorism, it's a challenge with so many sides. It's not just about military power or intelligence. We need to think about the root causes. Things like good governance, socioeconomic development, basically creating a society where extremism is less likely to happen in the first place.
That's a really important point. It's about building resilience. The source material mentions the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of controversy around it. Can you give us some more information about that? Sure. So the idea for the NCTC came after the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. It was supposed to be this central body that would handle intelligence gathering and counterterrorism efforts. The goal was to streamline information sharing and have a more coordinated response, but it faced a lot of opposition from certain states. They felt like it was stepping on their toes.
The whole Indian federalism thing, always trying to balance the power between the central government and the states.
Exactly. There were worries about the central government having too much control. And in the end, the NCTC proposal was put on hold because they couldn't agree. It shows just how tricky it can be to implement big changes like that in India's political system.
A good reminder that even with the best intentions, politics can get in the way. This trend of online radicalization has led to an increase in what they call lone wolf attacks. That was something else that the source material mentioned. What exactly are those?
Well, lone wolf attacks are acts of terrorism that are carried out by people acting on their own, sometimes in small groups, but without any direct support from bigger organizations. They're often motivated by a combination of things: personal grievances, extremist beliefs, even mental health issues that makes them extremely hard to predict and stop.
So now it's not just about keeping tabs on established groups, but also identifying individuals who might be vulnerable to radicalization even if they're acting alone.
Exactly. The internet, social media, it's made it so much easier for these dangerous ideas to spread. People can connect with others who think like them, even if they're miles apart. This makes it harder for intelligence agencies to track them.
It adds a whole new layer of complexity to the problem. How do you even begin to combat something that's so unpredictable and spread out?
Well, combating lone wolf terrorism, it needs a multi-layered strategy. You can't just rely on the old counterterrorism methods. Intelligence gathering and analysis are still crucial, of course, but we also need to focus on building trust with local communities. They can play a big role in identifying potential threats.
So it's about creating a sense of shared responsibility for security.
Yes, and it's about addressing the root causes of radicalization, promoting tolerance, understanding, countering extremist narratives, creating opportunities for dialogue and critical thinking.
Making sure those ideas don't even have a chance to take hold a much more proactive approach.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to be part of the solution. Community initiatives, educational programs, interfaith dialogues, these can all play a part in fostering unity and resilience against these ideologies.
Okay, switching gears a little bit. India has been pushing for a comprehensive convention on international terrorism, or CCIT, for a while now.
Yeah.
What's the goal of that?
Well, India first proposed the CCIT back in 1996. The idea was to create a global legal framework against terrorism. They wanted a universally accepted definition of terrorism, which, as we discussed earlier, is a big obstacle to international cooperation. It would also require countries to stop providing safe havens and support to terrorist groups.
It sounds like it could be a really important step in getting a more coordinated global response. Why hasn't it been adopted yet?
It's been stuck in limbo for years because of disagreements between countries. There's resistance to agreeing on a universal definition. Some countries are worried it could be used against them. It's complicated. Trying to get everyone on the same page about something as sensitive as terrorism is a huge challenge.
A reminder that international cooperation, as important as it is, can be incredibly difficult. The source material also mentions the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. What role do they play in all of this?
The FATF is basically an international organization that sets the rules for combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other things that threaten the global financial system. They have these blacklists and gray lists to pressure countries to do better in these areas.
So it's about using financial tools to cut off the money supply to these groups. Can you give us an example of how this works in practice?
Sure. Let's say a country has really weak laws about money laundering. The FATF could put them on their gray list, which is basically a warning to the rest of the world that this country is a high risk for financial crime. This could lead to economic sanctions or other penalties. So the country has an incentive to fix their laws and make sure they're enforced.
It's interesting how these international organizations can use financial pressure to change national policies.
Yeah.
The source material also talks about mutual legal assistance treaties, or MLANs. What are those?
MLATs are agreements between countries to help each other with criminal investigations and prosecutions. They're really important for dealing with crimes like terrorism that cross borders, because they allow countries to share information, evidence, and even extradite suspects. It helps get around jurisdictional issues and make sure that criminals can't just escape by going to another country.
So it's about creating a more connected legal system to make sure justice is served across borders.
Exactly. These treaties are absolutely crucial for tackling terrorism because these networks often operate in multiple countries.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. It's clear that combating terrorism requires this multi-pronged approach, from domestic laws and institutions to international cooperation and financial mechanisms.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process that demands constant attention, the ability to adapt, and a willingness to learn and change our strategies. And you know, something we often forget about is the role of ordinary people in civil society in all of this.
Now, that's interesting. We've been talking a lot about government policies and what's happening on the international level.
Yeah.
But what can regular people actually do to help fight terrorism?
While combating terrorism can't just be left to the government and security agencies, you need people, you need civil society organizations, you need communities to actively participate. It takes everyone working together to build a more resilient and secure society.
I get that, but what can individuals really do? I mean, it feels kind of overwhelming to think about tackling something this big.
Well, it all starts with being aware. When you're informed about the different types of terrorism, when you understand the threat, and when you know how to recognize the signs of radicalization, you're more likely to spot potential risks. And you can report anything suspicious to the authorities. Citizens can be the eyes and ears of their community.
So being vigilant, being informed, but also taking action if you see something that doesn't seem right.
Exactly, but it goes beyond that too. It's about creating a culture of tolerance and understanding in our communities. We have to challenge extremist ideas and narratives, promote critical thinking, and engage in constructive dialogue. That's how we can prevent extremism from taking hold.
Taking a proactive approach, building resilience from within.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to be part of the solution. Things like community-based initiatives, educational programs, interfaith dialogues, those can all contribute to a sense of unity and make communities more resistant to these dangerous ideologies.
This has been a truly incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground: the changing laws, the various types of terrorism India faces, the intricate world of terror financing, the emergence of online extremism, the importance of international collaboration, the difficulties of navigating federalism and counterterrorism efforts, and the absolutely crucial role of individuals in civil society.
It's been a pleasure discussing this incredibly complex issue with you. It's a topic that requires our constant attention, our willingness to adapt, and a dedication to addressing both the immediate symptoms and the underlying causes of terrorism.
Couldn't agree more. And a huge thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into combating terrorism in India. This is a topic that demands our attention and our collective effort to make the world a safer and more secure place. And before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click that bell icon so you never miss out on our latest deep dives. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.